Okay, this week we're going to look at Crisis in the Schools, Chapter 13. I think we can all say that in the new millennium, violence-proofing school buildings has become something of hot topic, especially after Columbine and Sandy Hook and all the different ways that children have been put in danger in school buildings, also in colleges. There are conflicting statistics, incidents of crime, fear and avoidance, threats to the teacher, and disciplinary action. That's all cut off of your slide, so I wanted you to know those. But we've tried to increase the control over school buildings. Many buildings now you can't get into without being buzzed in. There's telephones in all the classrooms, drug testing for students. Just trying to increase the safety for students. Your book has an interesting discussion about gangs. Definitely the rise of gangs has caused more violence in schools, and you can see the different types on this slide. There's a great video on frontline.org called The Interrupters, and it's all about preventing and intervening in gang violence in the streets. It's not, but it does spill over into the schools. But these are all different ways of mitigating some of the violence that can take place in gangs. There's a huge discussion about bullying now that takes place, and this slide cuts off, so I want to add some more things to it. 3 components. The bully has more power than the victim. There's a use of intimidation via threats. There's a pattern of behavior rather than a one-time incident. Cyberbullying, something that we've all become very familiar with. The use of technology to harass, humiliate, and intimidate and threaten another person. There's 8 types. Flaming, harassment, denigration, masquerading, outing, social exclusion, cyber stalking, and cyber threats. One of the best stories that I ever heard on the news media about intervening with bullies was a story about a principal in a middle school somewhere. I feel like it was in Massachusetts or Connecticut. He was new to the school, and he came in and gave us like a 10-question survey of the people in the school building and asked them basically for a list of their top 10 bullies. And what he found when he got all the results back is that he had basically the same 10 names in the entire school. And so, the parents were outraged that he was picking on these children and asking people to name names. But what he found was that when he began to intervene directly with the bully, he changed the entire school atmosphere. He found that many of the bullies had some problems at home and in their home lives, and he began mentoring them, getting them involved with outside activities, and he personally worked with the bullies, and it changed the entire school system. I thought that was very impactful because oftentimes, schools take this punishment approach. They isolate the bully, or they isolate both the bully and the bullied. There's a consequence approach and a feelings approach. But we don't always necessarily directly go for direct intervention with the person doing the bullying. So I thought that's why I thought that was an interesting story. Okay, this is probably the crux of the entire chapter, is the SVJOs and the EVJOs. SV stands for serious violent juvenile offender, and the EVJO stands for the estranged violent juvenile offender. And the book makes a big deal about the fact that this is all by comparing traits and characteristics and behaviors of the two, there are some serious moral, ethical, and legal implications to labeling or attempting to label potentially violent students, and even if these are accurate labels. So just know as we go through these that this is very controversial. It's an attempt to try to understand a phenomenon that has not been researched. The discussion really starts on page 489 and continues all the way through 493. It looks at abusive childhood, academic problems, altered states of consciousness, anger and low frustration to tolerance, whether they're the bully or whether they're bullied, chemical and substance abuse, criminal behavior, delayed cognitive and affective development, emotional lability and depression, external locus of control, and history of threats and threats of violence. So this would take a long time for me to go through it, but basically, clearly a history of childhood abuse, frequent moves, loss of a parent, inconsistent and punitive discipline, rejective rejection, these are all characteristics of both. There's very little parental control or supervision or curfews. There's internet access and television. It's kind of a free-for-all. So both the SVJO and the EVJO may rule the roost at home, and parents may be intimidated or afraid of the child. For the estranged violent juvenile offender, who does not have a positive or supportive of family, his sense of integration into a family likely will be weak and alienated, and he'll express contempt for his parents and dismiss their role in his life, and he'll insist on an inordinate degree of privacy, and his parents will have little information about his activities, friends, or school. Such alienation can be particularly true for both the mentally ill EVJO, even though he has an extremely supportive family situation, has received a great deal of nurturing and care. Parents can be in a great deal of denial about the potential for violence in either type. In academic problems, the serious violent juvenile offender will probably have a history of school problems, including truancy, poor grades, discipline problems, and problems with teacher. A combination of ADHD and conduct disorder is a high predictor of future violent behavior for the SVJO. In contrast, the EVJO will likely be a passive compliant in school and may do well academically. Altered states of consciousness, even if psychoactive substances are not ingested, their cognitive processes lead both the SVJO and the EVJO to limited reality testing. Typical reports after a violent incident include derealization, decompensation, and depersonalization. Statements like, "I was just seeing red and sort of blanked out," or "it's like I wasn't there, sort of watching a videotape, so it was like me but not really me," are both characteristics of both types. The mentally ill EVJO may operate in a continued state of altered consciousness and may have minimal contact with reality of the situation. Anger, low frustration tolerance. Both types react to stress in self-defeating ways. They have a short fuse. Bullied and bully. The SVJO is the stereotypical bully, a bully at school. He's probably most likely a victim at home. The EVJO is a stereotypical bullied child, and he may fall into one of two categories, the passive victim or the aggressive victim. The aggressive victim may be hot-tempered and attempt to retaliate when attacked. Paradoxically, the aggressive victim may also be seen as a bully, whereas the passive bullied child is depicted as lonely and socially isolated at school. Chemical and substance abuse. Both types can have altered consciousness by using substances and freeing themselves to commit violent acts. Substance abuse markedly increases the potential for violence. Criminal behavior. In contrast to a gang member who probably has a long history of contacts with police, the EVJO most likely does not. The EVJO is as likely as not to be seen as good and compliant by the teachers. The comments from his neighbors are typically, "He's a really quiet, polite boy." He may have excellent church attendance, belong to the Boy Scouts, and other socially appropriate organizations. If the EVJO has any contact with the police, it will most likely be of the petty misdemeanor nature and involve passive acts against objects rather than aggressive acts against people. If the EVJO is mentally ill, he may have had contact with the authorities through domestic disturbance or mentally ill calls. All right, I'm going to run out of time, so I'll let you continue to read, but those are just some of the characteristics. Go through the rest of the list in the book. Really, the key is early detection and prevention, because once an armed, suicidal, or homicidal student sets foot in the school with a plan of action, all the metal detectors in the world are not going to stop him from carrying out his intended plan. So the problem with profiling the estranged, violent juvenile offender who is not mentally ill is that any staff member in the school could probably identify at least 20% of the male population who might fit into the profile and may have many of the characteristics described. So how can we screen this? Leakage. Leakage occurs when a student intentionally or unintentionally reveals feelings, thoughts, fantasies, attitudes, and intentions that signal a violent act. Could be through stories, diaries, poems, essays, doodles, drawings, tattoos, videos, threats, predictions, and ultimatums. So it's this idea that another form of leakage occurs when unwitting friends or classmates are coerced or deceived into helping in preparations for violent acts. Leakage can be cries for help. Again, the warning, the drawings, the pictures, the videos, peer referral. There are very, very few incidences in which the EVJO does not give some warning of his intentions to harm himself or others. So students have heard statements or seen notes from the student. The problem with peer referral is twofold. One, first, the other students are afraid of snitching or narking, so they keep quiet. One of the best ways to screen for potentially violent students is through a peer referral and notification system run by peers and coordinated by the school crisis worker. Conflict resolution, peer mediation, peer leadership, and peer counseling are all programs that allow students to legitimately notify faculty of potentially violent students. The threat assessment team, another major step is establishing a threat assessment team, much like what they have in college campuses now. And that's a very important step. Interviewing the potential EVJO. So on page 295, you'll see kind of a case of John, and what I want you to do is go through that and read through that. Basically, the steps are pretty much the same as what we've all been looking through this entire semester. You want to ensure safety, look at their motive, the opportunity, their method, their means, provide support, and find out their action steps, what they are planning on doing, and seeing how we can basically determine whether the student is indeed a threat, and make an immediate referral, notify everybody necessary. Primary consideration is what to do if the student is carrying a weapon. If the crisis worker feels the relationship with the student is positive enough and the student indicates that he has a weapon on his possession, then the crisis worker may ask for safekeeping. And taking a weapon, the crisis worker should always be sure it is handed over butt first, or if it's a knife, handle first. If the crisis worker is unsure of the student's intent, and if the student is resistant, the crisis worker should immediately seek help and get out of the room. If the student indicates he has a weapon in his locker or has some other hiding place, the crisis worker should have another person go with him or her to the hiding place. In no instance should the crisis worker attempt to be a hero and attempt to forcibly take a weapon away from a student. So that's very important. School-based suicide prevention and intervention. It is a volatile period of time, adolescence. They're dealing with a lot of different things. Suicide ranks third behind homicide and vehicle accidents as one of the leading causes of death in adolescence. From 1952 to 1995, the incidence of suicide among adolescents rose 300%. From 1980 to 1997, the rate of suicide among 10 to 14-year-olds rose 109%. Factoring in that there are about 6,000 to 7,000 completed suicides among children and adolescents per year, that for every one completed suicide, there are between 100 and 200 youth who attempt it. There is an average likelihood that every year, every teacher in every high school classroom in the United States can expect 2 girls and 1 boy to seriously contemplate or attempt suicide. And every principal in the average American high school can expect 1 completed suicide every 5 years and 170 attempts in any given year, although most certainly most of these will never come to the school's attention. Suicide is a problem that is far more prevalent and far more lethal than the school assaults combined, even though school shootings get far more publicity. So this is very, very important. And on page 499, talks about sort of the written procedures that should be followed. So read through the list of school-based interventions. Risk factors and cues. Again, adolescents really have lots of questions about their life, and they have a lot of things going on. We've talked already about clues and behaviors that are commonly found as suicide indicators in Chapter 8. Most of them would hold true for adolescents and children, including sudden changes in friends and dress habits, cutting hair, changing hairstyles, difficulty concentrating, persistent boredom, sudden or increased promiscuity, reversal of valuation of prized objects, use of drugs and alcohol, and a decline in student achievement. Copycat suicides are particularly problematic for teens if they believe there's going to be notoriety attached to them. Let's see. So this is a very important section. I'm going to let you, again, go ahead and read through page 500 through page 509 and really read through all the different cases and the different interventions. Legal and ethical issues of potentially violent behavior, confidentiality and duty to warn. School officials have a legal obligation to take action when students pose a danger to other students or themselves. Courts have been reluctant to find school authorities liable in school violence cases, with some notable exceptions. The primary legal concern related to providing services for students prior to, during, and after a crisis is negligence. Although we're mainly speaking of intent to harm others, negligence can occur in any school situation. School districts become liable in a suicide case when there is foreseeability and negligence. For example, the example of foreseeability would occur when a student's note indicating a potential homicide or suicide is intercepted but was dismissed as harmless. Negligence would occur if a violent act occurred and no intervention or planning for the act had been made or attempted. These legal concepts come into play when there's a lack of preparation by the school and due diligence by the staff. So it's really important that schools don't, just slide things under the rug. The consistency of intervention, zero tolerance. When we speak of consistency of intervention, we're not advocating a zero tolerance policy. Such policies have become the predominant operation mode in schools, frightened of legal liability and accusation that they are prejudiced, arbitrary, and capricious in their decision making. So, zero tolerance, the APA, or the American Psychological Association, studied the zero tolerance policies and found little substantive data to justify this approach. The sparse data that did exist showed that it is mostly ineffective. It causes alienation in both students and parents and tends to focus on minorities and students with disabilities. Zero tolerance often serves as a pipeline to juvenile justice system when in fact most cases could have been handled at school. The problem of doing something in the university setting. And I have to say I've had some issues in my own classroom that have kind of shined a light on the fact that it's really hard for institutions to understand how to react sometimes. Unless ordered by a court, no one can be required to get counseling of any kind. A university can only suggest it, nor can parents play much of a part in providing support, removing a son and daughter for psychiatric help, or for that matter, even be made aware that their child is in psychological or academic hot water unless the children themselves inform the parent. Because once an individual turns 18, FERPA, or the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974, comes into play. And this is about individuals' privacy rights. And plus HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996, adds further restrictions on the transmittal of information. So there's all sorts of legal rights that make it difficult for us to warn people at a university setting because they are adults. On page 515, there's an example of the TASL form, which is a triage assessment. It's a triage assessment system for students in a learning environment. It's shorter than the TAF form has been, but you'll see that it just kind of helps rate students and their threat assessment. It should be filled out by the threat assessment team. Implementing a crisis plan, very important. Physical requirements. You need to have as many locations as possible for identifying a crisis counseling office. Crisis counseling will involve a variety of activities. There needs to be an operations and community center. It could be in a break room. It could be an information center, a first aid room. On-site communication, establishing a phone tree among all staff. Procedural checklist lists, building plans, provisions, responding to the crisis. It's really important. It's really important to be calm, and the be calm stands for before you act, be sure you have the facts, call for help, communicate instructions, collaborate, anticipate what would happen next, and adjust the plan, listen to your audience, manage the crisis. So you'll see on pages 520 to 522 kind of the whole process that they have laid out for you. Bereavement in schools. The sudden death of a student, teacher, or other school personnel can precipitate a bereavement crisis for an entire school or school community, which can lead to PTSD, high-intensity grief, and complicated mourning. So it's very important that there is a plan in place, what the school should do. Really understand the process of grief, give people permission to grieve, allow time, listen, really tell stories or reminisce about the person, giving support for a variety of feelings, know that you can't fix the pain, engaging with the students, supporting them, designing a support group, and letting them know they're not alone. Group work is excellent, and then defining the boundaries. Probably one of the toughest jobs of a crisis team and the school administration is to discourage parents, students, and other various interested groups in the community from honoring the death by conducting a commemorative service or other memorial at the school. Unequivocally, suicidal students should not be formally memorialized by the school because of the possible copycats. It cannot be overemphasized that the school administration should be the ones to make the decision about the response to school tragedies in which deaths occur. Overall, it is probably best for the school not to memorialize any kind of deaths in any fashion. Assemblies, yearbooks, trees planted, rooms or fields named, and so on, because of the perception of differential treatment. Bluntly stated, schools are in the education business, not in the funeral home or memorial business. A researcher named Trotter recommends that after the funeral, all the drawings and other eulogies and epitaphs be collected and given to the family and not kept on display in the school. She also recommends that the student's chair be left alone until the day after the funeral, but then all chairs in the room need to be rearranged. She proposes that immediately upon notification, a member of the crisis team should go to the student's locker, collect all the personal items when the students are not present, and prevent memorializing the locker. A student's locker should be left vacant for the remainder of the year, but then merged into the standard locker assignment for next year's class. Louver in 2002 believes that with younger children, the desks should be left in the room until other students want it moved out. She further purposes that a suitable memorial be constructed by the children, such as positive epitaphs or signed teddy bear that the class might give to the parents when they come to the school to collect the child's things.